I am reading On the Two Wings, Humble Faith and Common Sense at the American Founding by Novak. It says the leaders of the American Revolution were not like the leaders of the French Revolution, secularists. So the leaders of the American Revolution were not like the leaders of the French Revolution, secularists. They did not set out to erase religion. Indeed, as Michael Novak points out in this brilliant book about the birth of the American Republic, the very first act of the Continental Congress was to pray to the divine providence in the face of British bombardment of Boston. And establishing a new model of self-government, the founders believed that they were not only acting according to reason and common sense, but also obeying a religious duty. Benjamin Franklin proposed as their motto, quote, "Rebellion against tyrants is obedience to God," end quote. There have been religious peoples throughout history, including Jews and early Christians, whose strong faith did not lead to the creation of a republic of civil liberty. The American ego could not have risen without the empirical turn of mind embodied in John Locke's teaching on the ends of government and the consent of the governed. The founders also believed that liberty depends on certain habits of life, and these in turn depend on faith as well as reason. In telling the story of the forgotten, if not deliberately ignored, role of faith in America's genesis, Novak probes the innermost religious conviction of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and others who helped the American eagle take flight, including some of the lesser-known founders whose reputation has dimmed with the passage of time. These founders were not quote-unquote deists, Novak shows, but shared an underlying quote-unquote Hebrew metaphysics of contingency, openness, and liberty. In the course of his illustrious career, Michael Novak has written several prize-winning books on theology and philosophy. Now, On the Two Wings, he has created a profound meditation on American history and on human nature and destiny as well. This book is original, unconventional, and thoroughly stunning. It could not have come at a better time. It says, "Tell the Israelites, quote, I bore you up on eagle wings and brought you here to myself. Therefore, if you hearken to my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my special possession, dearer to me than all other people." Exodus 19, 3b through 5. I always consider the settlement of America with reverence and wonder as the opening of a grand scene and design in providence for the illumination of the ignorant and the emancipation of the slavish part of mankind all over the earth. John Adams, Works 166. I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist of the other sect, who believed or pretend to believe that all is ordered by chance, I should believe that chance had ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality and consequently of all civilization. That's John Madden to F.A. Vanderkamp, February 16, 1809. We cannot but acknowledge that God hath graciously patronized our cause and taken us under his special care, as he did his ancient covenant people. Samuel Langdon, The Republic of the Israelites, an example to the United States. I wanted to read from the Jewish metaphysics at the founding. Hebrew metaphysics. It has been often remarked that the people of the United States come nearer to a parallel with ancient Israel than any other nation upon the globe. Hence our American Israel is a term frequently used, and common consent allows it apt and proper. This is Abiel Abbott, Thanksgiving Sermon, 1799. This quote, "The Bible was the one book that literate Americans in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries could be expected to know well," end quote. Robert Bellah has written, quote, "Biblical imagery provided the basic framework for imaginative thought in America up until quite recent times, and unconsciously its control is still formidable," end quote. As a design for the seal of the United States, Jefferson suggested, quote, a representation of the children of Israel in the wilderness, led by a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, end quote. He later concluded his second inaugural address with the same image. It says, quote, I shall need the favor of the being in whose hands we are, who led our fathers, as Israel of old, from their native land and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessaries and comforts of life, end quote. This image of, quote, God's American Israel, end quote, made available for fresh perspectives, brought to intense focus by the Americans in a new way and historically original way. The first of these new perspectives was a narrative of purpose and progress. The Gentiles of the ancient world believed in cycles of time as regular, they thought. As the circular movements of the stars, they believed in eternal recurrence. But the Americans of 1770 and 1799 did not believe that time is cyclical, going nowhere, spinning in circles pointlessly. They believed that history had a beginning and was guided by providence for a purpose. Thus John Adams, quote, I always consider the settlement of America with reverence and wonder as the opening of a grand scene and design in providence for the illumination of the ignorant and the emancipation of the slavish part of mankind all over the earth, end quote. Time, in the view of the founders, was created for the unfolding of human liberty, for human emancipation. The purpose requires humans to choose for or against building cities worthy of the ideals God sets before them: liberty, justice, equality, self-government, and brotherhood. The very first paragraph of the Federalists stresses this moment of choice. It says, it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. If there be any truth in the remark, the crisis at which we are arrived may with propriety be regarded as the era in which that decision is to be made, and a wrong election of the part we shall act may, in this view, deserve to be considered as a general misfortune of mankind. Since time was created by a God who, quote unquote, humbled himself, reaching down to dramatize full human potentialities by, quote unquote, providential signs among the human beings he had created, thereafter, quote, in the course of human events, end quote, human beings are called to learn from their own mistakes and failures, to put together piece by piece, quote, an improved science of politics, end quote, and slowly work out a design for institutions of liberty and political economy. History is a record of progress or decline, measured by permanent standards, God's standards, as learned from and tested by long experience. History, in this sense, open, purposive, contingent in liberty, is not a Greek or Roman idea. It is Hebraic. Its source springs from the biblical historians and prophets. Probably most of the humans who had ever lived before the arrival of Judaism on the world stage never even heard of a quote unquote progress. The literature of Greece and Rome looks backwards to golden ages of the past. The movement of time is circular. For Jews and Christians, by contrast, history is heading somewhere new, towards the new kingdom of God, a kingdom of justice and love and peace, a new city on a hill. Humans are impelled by their innermost nature to seek that new city. This quote-unquote pilgrim's progress is not a straight line, and it is not automatic or inevitable. It is by way of trial and suffering. Here is Federalist number 14, and it states, had no important step been taken by the leaders of the revolution for which a precedent could not be discovered, no government established of which an exact model did not present itself, the people of the United States might at this moment have been numbered among the melancholy victims of misguided counsels, must at best have been laboring under the weight of some of those forms which have crushed the liberties of the rest of mankind. Happily for America, happily we trust, for the whole human race, they pursued a new and more noble course. They accomplished a revolution which has no parallel in the annals of human society. They reared the fabrics of governments which have no model on the face of the globe. They formed the design of a great confederacy which it is incumbent on their successors to improve and perpetuate. Second, Hebrew metaphysics held that everything in creation, in all its workings and purpose, is intelligible, suffused with reason, not absurd, in the eyes of a divine and loving Creator who created from nothing everything that is, and saw that it was good and loved it. A Creator who is more powerful than earthquakes, floods, erupting volcanoes, hurricanes, and anything else in the world, and different from them. One should not mistake this God for any part of His creation, as the Mayan Indians seem to have done, identifying God with rain and snakes and frogs and jackals, powerful forces in the dark, all of them. On the one hand, the world is not in itself divine. On the other, the Creator cannot be touched, tasted, heard, seen, or smelled. The Creator is independent of the world. Therefore, the world can be looked into, investigated, and experimented with without infringing on His divinity. Strictly speaking, the Creator is beyond human categories, cannot be expressed in words that are like other words, imagined from the things of this world, or named as other things are named. He is not part of the material world seeking Him. It is better to aim one's mind in the direction of spirit and truth rather than matter toward an ineffable one whom we do not name. Instead, we place 4 letters where a name would normally be, thus the Hebrew letters that in English we pronounce Yahweh. Third, cherishing humble and weak things. Most of all, the Creator made at least 2 creatures to know Him, to love Him, and in total freedom, and not as slaves, to walk with Him. Just quote, male and female, He made them, end quote, Genesis 1:27. Says, quote, the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time, end quote. Jefferson wrote, summarizing the biblical metaphysic, liberty is the human condition established by the Bible, nearly every chapter of which turns upon the exercise of that freedom as a wheel upon its axis. What will Adam, King David, Peter, Saul do next? Liberty is the axis of the universe, the ground of the possibility of love, human and divine. And thus John Adams wrote, quote, let us see delineated before us the true map of man. Let us hear the dignity of his nature and the noble rank he holds among the works of God, and that God Almighty has promulgated from heaven liberty, peace, and goodwill to men. End quote. Moreover, the American tradition clearly distinguishes a false idea of liberty, license from the true liberty exercised in reflection and deliberate choice. Despite this high calling, men and women fail often, are vulnerable to human weakness, and are in want of checks and balances against their frailties. Fourth, in Hebrew metaphysics, the brief span of a human life is experienced as a time of suffering, testing whether humans can remain faithful to God's purpose in creating them, whether we will or will not show grace under pressure. In the Bible, the bright red thread of human history is not just liberty, but liberty on trial. God, wrote John Perkins, quote, deals with mankind as rational beings in a state of trial and probation, end quote. For many generations of Americans, Pilgrim's Progress dramatized this time of trial. The young should steel themselves for later suffering. Yes, it's steel, S-T-E-E-L. Themselves, the young should steel themselves for later suffering. The drama of their lives can be simply stated. Will they exemplify under pressure a noble use of liberty as their forebears did? And the stating states, let us read and recollect and impress upon our souls the views and ends of our own more immediate forefathers, in exchanging their native country for a dreary and inhospitable wilderness. Let us examine into the nature of that power and the cruelty of that oppression, which drove them from their homes, recollect their amazing fortitude, their bitter sufferings, the hunger, the nakedness, the cold, which they patiently endured, the severe labors of clearing their grounds, building their houses, raising their provisions amidst the dangers from wild beasts and savage men, before they had time or money or materials for commerce. recollect the civil and religious principles and hopes and expectations which constantly supported and carried them through all hardships with patience and resignation. Let us recollect it was liberty, the hope of liberty for themselves and us and ours, which conquered all discouragements, dangers, and trials. This drama of liberty gave birth to two Whig theories of history, one Protestant and one Catholic. Nowadays, even secular people interpret history in the light of progress, rights, and liberty. Yet unbelievers received these concepts neither from the Greeks and Romans nor from enlightened reason, but via the preaching of Jesus Christ, from whom the Gentiles learned the essential outlook of the Hebrews, that the Creator gave humans a special place among all other creatures, and made them free, and endowed them with incomparable responsibility and dignity. This sequence of related conceptions, that time had a beginning and is measured for progress or decline by God's standards, that everything in the world is intelligible, and that to inquire, invent, and discover is an impulse of faith as well as of reason. That the Creator endowed us with liberty and inviolable dignity, while the divine judge shows concern for the weak and the humble, that life is a time of duty and trial, and that history is to be grasped as the drama of human liberty. All these are the background that makes sense of the Declaration of Independence. America and Israel, the first Israel and the second, shed light on each other. The God of heaven hath not indeed visibly displayed the glory of his majesty and power before our eyes, as he came down in the sight of Israel on the burning mount, nor has he written with his own finger the laws of our civil polity, but the signal interpositions of divine providence, in saving us from the vengeance of a powerful irritated nation from which we were unavoidably separated by their inadmissible claim of absolute parliamentary power over us, in giving us a Washington to be Captain General of our armies, in carrying us through the various distressing scenes of war and desolation, and making us twice triumphant over numerous armies, surrounded and captivated in the midst of their career, and finally giving us peace with a large territory and acknowledged independence. All these laid together fall little short of real miracles in the heavenly charter of liberty for these United States. We cannot but acknowledge that God hath graciously patronized our cause and taken us under his special care, as he did his ancient covenant people. So without this metaphysical background, the founding generation of Americans would have had little heart for the War of Independence. They would have had no ground for believing that their seemingly unlawful rebellion actually fulfilled the will of God, and suited the law of nature and nature's God. Consider the jeopardy in which their rebellion placed them. When they signed the Declaration, they were committing treason in the king's eyes. If their frail efforts failed, their flagrant betrayal of the solemn oaths of loyalty they had sworn to their king doomed them to a public hanging. Before future generations, their children would be disgraced. To still their trembling, they pled their case before a greater and wholly undeceivable judge, quote, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, end quote. In analogous straits, other Christians in other places and times acted differently. Contrast the role given to rebellion, Satan's, quote, non-surveillance, in John Milton's Paradise Lost, with Benjamin Franklin's, quote, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God, end quote. The Bible is not a cut-out book. It is not a pattern book that has been used by all people at all times in the same way. Americans took its appeal to the imperishable dignity of each person with uncommon hope and optimism, erecting on it, with the help of Locke and many others, a new structure of rights and covenants. The depths of this metaphysical background gave them unusual moral strength. Any recounting of the story of the American polity that cuts off this metaphysical background will never fly. The added life of faith. In recent generations, many writers on the American experiment have shown painfully little knowledge of detailed discussions on faith and reason that had taken place among learned Christians since the 3rd century AD. By contrast, most of the nation's founders knew the meaning of such classic terms as quote-unquote sentiment, opinion, conviction, and evidence. In their original language, and their original Latin and Greek, and in Madison's case, Hebrew. From the generally high intellectual level of preaching in many American churches, ministers often being the best educated of all citizens, they had also learned to draw classic distinctions and to deploy traditional terms. The quote-unquote commencement thesis required of graduating students by Columbia, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and William and Mary, for instance, were still in the language and forms of medieval scholasticism. But what, we may ask, did these learned men think that the lamp of faith added to the lamp of reason and experience? What did faith provide that reason itself did not supply? The founders mentioned at least 7 contributions. First, faith adds to reason a cosmic stage, a drama of the free exercise of personal responsibility in history, and an acute awareness of a climactic judgment on quote-unquote the last day, in which no thought, word, or deed will escape scrutiny. In these ways, faith enlarges the human horizon, lifts the eyes. Humans come to see themselves as among all creatures, this is quote-unquote the free and the brave. Free because, unlike all the other animals, they must make choices, and brave because they will have to do battle against themselves, first of all, but also against cosmic forces of evil and darkness that may sometimes overwhelm them. The fact that men and women alone of all creatures are contrived with reason and understanding, not brute instinct alone, proved to the founders that they are ordained for self-government and self-control. Second, faith stimulates and enlivens the conscience, making it aware of small nuisances of temptation, inclination, and resistance. When a young man asked Thomas Jefferson how to prepare for a life of freedom, Jefferson replied, saying, "Give up money, give up fame, give up science, give the earth itself and all it contains, rather than do an immoral act, and never suppose that in any possible situation or under any circumstance it is best for you to do a dishonorable thing, however slightly so it may appear to you. Whenever you do a thing, though it can be known only but to yourself, ask yourself how you would act were all the world looking at you, and act accordingly. Encourage all your virtuous dispositions, and that exercise will make them habitual. Then, as if predicting exactly what could happen to a future leader, Jefferson adds, "Nothing is so mistaken as the supposition that a person is to extricate himself from a difficulty by intrigue, by chicanery, by dissimulation, by trimming, by an untruth, by an injustice. This increases the difficulties tenfold, and those who pursue these methods get themselves so involved at length that they can turn no way but their infamy becomes more exposed. It is of great importance to set a resolution not to be shaken, never to tell an untruth. There is no vice so mean, so pitiful, so contemptible, and he who permits himself to tell a lie once finds it much easier to do it a second and a third time, till at length it becomes habitual. He tells lies without attending to it, and truths without the world believing him. The falsehood of the tongue leads to that of the heart, and in time depraves all its good dispositions. Faith, in short, lifts one's eyes to goals beyond those of fame, advancement, science, and any of the goods of the earth. Faith teaches us that some deeds, even if unknown to others, and even if utilitarian, are contemptible in themselves. All this from Jefferson, perhaps the least religious of the major founders. Third, as an ill-fated bill in the Virginia Assembly put in the 1784, just quote, the general diffusion of Christian knowledge have a tendency to correct the morals of men, restrain their vices, and preserve the peace of the society, end quote. Although Americans are bold and enterprising in making their fortunes, this is Tocqueville writes, it says, the American revolutionaries are obliged ostensibly to profess a certain respect for Christian morality and equity, and that does not allow them easily to break the laws when those are opposed to the executions of their designs. nor would they find it easy to surmount the scruples of their partisans, even if they were able to get over their own. Up till now, no one in the United States has dared to profess the maxim that everything is allowed in the interest of society, an impious maxim apparently invented to legitimize every future tyrant. Thus, while in a free society, quote, the law allows the American people to do everything, there are things which religion prevents them from imagining and forbids them to dare, end quote, such as breaking the law. When consciousness are active, policemen need be few, citizens are law-abiding willingly. Colonial Americans had already experienced periods of declines in religion, accompanied by a steady rise in moral carelessness. They had also seen religious awakenings lead to tangible improvements in social peace. This is why they all believe that religion, quote, is necessary for the maintenance of republican institutions. That is not the view of one class or party among the citizens, but of the whole nation. It is found in all ranks, end quote. Fourth, Tocqueville again says, quote, fixed ideas about God and human nature are indispensable to men for the conduct of daily life, and it is daily life that prevents them from acquiring them, end quote. But these, quote, fixed ideas, end quote, are difficult for most men to reach. Even great philosophers stumble in trying to come to them, but biblical faith provides a reason, something that only very few philosophers, and they only uncertainly can reach for themselves. Thus, sound religion, tested in long experience, gives a culture an immense advantage, for man cannot act without living out general ideas. Clarity of soul prevents enervation and the dissipation of energies. Some ideas, Tocqueville writes, are a particular boon to free men. Ideas rooted in the unity of humankind, duties to neighbor, truth, honesty, and love with the law of reason. Regarding these essential ideas, the answers biblical religion gives are, quote, clear, precise, intelligible to the crowd, and very durable, end quote. Fifth, religion adds a reason, indispensable support for the view that every human being is not simply a bundle of pleasures and pains, a higher kind of cow or kitten or other contented domestic animal. This is, quote, democracy favors the taste for physical pleasures, end quote. Tocqueville writes, quote, this taste, if it becomes excessive, soon disposes men to believe that nothing but matter exists. Materialism in its turn spurs them on to such delights with mad impetuosity, with mad impetuosity, if I said that correctly. Such is the vicious circle into which democratic nations are driven. It is good that they see the danger and drawback, end quote. The principle of equality that animates democracies, pulling men downward, will slowly destroy what is most human in them, their souls. It is religion that checks and reverses this process, and more than that, spurs greatness. Tocqueville thinks, faith shows its good effects in art and manners, as well as in the arena of practical action. Belief in immortality prods humans to aspire upwards, and in this way grounds their awareness of their own special dignity and natural rights. 6. Faith adds to a morality of mere reason an acute sense of acting in the presence of a personal and undeceivable judge who sees and knows even actions performed in secret, even willful acts committed solely in one's heart. Thus, faith adds motives for maintaining high standards and for seeking to do things perfectly even when no one is looking. Faith gives us reasons to paint the bottom of the chair and to clean the unseen corners of a room. Godliness entails attention to details that no one but God sees, whereas morality construed within the bounds of reason alone is at best a matter of utilitarian calculation or deontological rules. Faith sees moral behavior in terms of relations between two persons, ourselves and the God to whom we owe much. In this vein, Ben Franklin chastised his colleagues at the Constitutional Convention for their ingratitude to their beneficent friend who had assisted them when they were in need. And it's saying, In the situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of Lights to illuminate our understandings? In the beginnings of the contest with G. Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of superintending providence in our favor. To that kind of providence we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. The seventh, faith in America has had a dramatic effect on Moors, especially in the home. In America, Tocqueville writes, religion, quote, reigns supreme in the souls of women, and it is women who shape Moors. Certainly, of all the countries in the world, America is the one in which the marriage tie is most respected and where the highest and truest conception of conjugal happiness has been conceived, end quote. Tocqueville has no doubt that the, quote, great severity of Moors, which one notices in the United States, has its primary origin in beliefs, end quote. The comparative laxity of morals in Europe breeds mistrust, even in the home, and even broader ripples of mistrust in the public sphere beyond the home. As it states, in Europe, almost all the disorders of society are born around the domestic hearth, and not far from the nuptial bed. It is there that men come to feel scorn for natural ties and legitimate pleasures, and develop a taste for disorder, restlessness of spirit, and instability of desires, shaken by the tumultuous passions which have often troubled his own house. The European finds it hard to submit to the authority of the state's legislators. When there is no trust in the home, trust in public life is highly improbable. Where there is lack of self-government at home, self-government in the public sphere has little probability of success. If one cannot say, quote, that in the United States religion influences the laws or political opinions in detail, end quote, Tocqueville continues, quote, it does direct Moors, and by regulating domestic life it helps to regulate the state, end quote. In sum, to say nothing of other worldly benefits, faith adds to reason 7 worldly strengths. 1. A cosmic stage for the drama of liberty. 2. A watchful conscience. 3. Restraint of vice and gains in social peace. 4. Fixed, stable, and general ideas about the dynamics of life. 5. A check on the downward bias of the principle of equality and the materialism toward which it gravitates. 6. A new conception of morality as a personal relation with our Creator, and thus a motive for acting well even when no one is looking. And 7. Through the high honor paid to the marriage bond, the quiet regulation of mores in marriage and in the home.